By Ontario's standards, the last 6 years for policing in the United Kingdom has been nothing short of a revolution. Overseeing the 6 years of policing reform was Theresa May, then Home Secretary. Yes, she is now the Prime Minister. While she is a tad busy, we are pleased that Wendy Williams of Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary could join us. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, HMIC, inspects and monitors 43 police forces in England and Wales. This includes annual inspections of police forces in relation to effectiveness, efficiency, and legitimacy, as well as a broader thematic investigations affecting all forces. There is no Ontario equivalent to the scale and scope of inspections carried out annually by the HMIC. She is currently Her Majesty's Inspector for Wales and the Western region. Wendy's career has been diverse. Many years as a lawyer, practicing criminal and child care law, time as a legal inspector of Crown prosecutions, and as Chief Crown Prosecutor of the Northeast. Wendy currently leads joint inspections with counterparts in the areas of prosecutions, probation, and prisons. She also leads HMIC's efforts related to child protection and rape monitoring. Listen carefully as Wendy shares with us the changes made, some incredible outcomes and lessons learned along the change continuum. Join me in giving a warm welcome to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Wendy Williams.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to AMO, and specifically thank you to AMO President McNamara for your gracious invitation, your hospitality, and your kind introduction. I've been fortunate to be in Canada for a few days ahead of the conference, as well as to be at the conference itself. And it is absolutely true, you do get a warm Canadian welcome when you come to Canada. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the challenges that have faced policing in England and Wales over the last 5 to 6 years. It's important, however, that I stress that I'm not speaking on behalf of the UK government. And also, whilst I certainly hope that what I have to say will be of relevance to you all, I am certainly not saying that we've got all of the answers. So, over the next 25 minutes or so, I shall cover the following: the political and economic context for policing in England and Wales over the last 5 or 6 years, the role of my organisation, HMIC, our findings, and finally, the true challenge facing policing today in the UK as I see it. So to the first part of my talk, the political and fiscal context of policing. I'd like to take you back in time to 2010 and to the general election in the UK. At that time, the Labour government had been in power for some 13 years. And following the general election, for the first time in 13 years, the Conservative government polled more seats than the Labour Party. However, they didn't have an overall majority, and as you may recall, they formed a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats, who at that time were the third largest party in the country. And so that was the first coalition government since the Second World War. In 2010, the UK, along with many, if not most other countries in the world, was going through an economic recession following the banking crisis that had occurred. And at the time, the UK's budget deficit was approximately £153 billion, which I think equates to about 250 billion Canadian dollars. And the coalition government at the time was committed to substantially reducing the budget deficit dramatically over the 5-year term of the Parliament and to clearing the deficit completely by 2020. So back in 2010, this manifesto commitment had significant implications, not just for central government, but also for local policing. To quote from the 2010 coalition government agreement, they said, "We share a conviction that the days of big government are over, that centralisation and top-down control have proved a failure. We believe that the time has come to disperse power more widely in Britain today. In short, it is our ambition to distribute power and opportunity to people rather than hoarding authority within government. That way, we can build the free, fair, and responsible society that we want to see." And specifically in respect of policing, the coalition agreement said, "We will introduce measures to make the police more accountable through oversight by a directly elected individual who will be subject to strict checks and balances by locally elected representatives." Which brings me to the political context for policing. Before the 2010 general election, each police force was held to account by a police authority, the equivalent of your police service boards, about which I've just been hearing from the minister. The local police authorities consisted of 17 members who were politically elected and independent officials, and also lay justices or magistrates. The main function of the police authority was to secure an efficient and effective police force. But then a new role was created in the police accountability landscape: the Police and Crime Commissioner. Between 2010 and 2012, the government introduced legislation which abolished police authorities and replaced them with police and crime commissioners. Responsibility for holding police forces to account would vest in one individual, and each police and crime commissioner would be elected directly by their local communities, and they'd be obliged to produce a local police and crime plan, a kind of local policing manifesto, if you will. And that police and crime plan would be scrutinised by a body, a police and crime panel, which was far more removed from the police authorities that preceded this model. And I think it's fair to say that this marked a significant change to the way that policing was held to account. The first elections for police and crime commissioners took place in 2012, yes, when they were elected for a 4-year term. The next round of police and crime commissioner elections took place in May of this year, when again those PCCs were elected for a 4-year term. And I think that now that the model is established, it is likely to continue for quite some time to come. Now, at the same time as introducing police and crime commissioners to hold forces to account, the government also set out its ambitions in relation to public sector funding, including police funding. In its 2010 spending review, the government stated that central government police funding would be reduced by up to 20% over the next 5 years, over the 5-year Parliament term. In order to make these savings, the government required forces to drive out inefficiencies, improve productivity, and reduce substantially back office costs. In turn, the government would end all central policing targets. Previously, forces across the country in England, Wales, and the rest of the UK were subject to quite stringent policing targets in relation to specific types of offences, such as burglary and robberies. But the government said that would go, and instead they would replace this with a general target, which was to reduce crime. The police, by contrast, were somewhat less confident that they could deliver the sorts of changes that were required without this adversely affecting the quality of the service that they were delivering to the public. Let me pause here to say that, in my view, I do think that the advent of police and crime commissioners has completely changed the landscape for policing. And I think it's fair to say that with increased profile has come an increased level of expectation, not only in respect of police forces, but also in respect of police chiefs. I can think of 3 occasions, one of which is ongoing at the moment, where police and crime commissioners are either considering removing or have removed police chiefs. And so most police chiefs would probably agree that with that higher level of scrutiny has come an increased level of accountability. And speaking of scrutiny, that's where my organisation comes in, which brings me to the third part of my talk. I should probably say I've received a bit of ribbing over the past couple of days, so I'd just like to clarify something. That really is my job title. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, or HMIC as we say for short, is an independent organisation which inspects the police and reports directly to the public whom we serve. The Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Sir Thomas Windsor, and the 5 inspectors of Constabulary, of which I am one, are all appointed by Her Majesty the Queen on the recommendation of the Home Secretary. It's true that one of my HMI colleagues is a former police chief, but the rest of us do come from very diverse backgrounds, and I think we can all confidently say that we are truly independent of the police service. The principal function of HMIC is to inspect and report on the efficiency and effectiveness of every police force. There are, as you've heard, 43 forces in England and Wales, and I'm responsible for inspecting 13 of those 43 forces, and they have a combined population of in excess of 14 million people. HMI does have other powers to look at other forces and other jurisdictions, such as the National Crime Agency, but I shall only focus on England and Wales for today. It's important to remember that HMIC does not have the power to inspect police and crime commissioners or their activities. That is the job of their electorate, who hold them to account. We do inspect the work and activities of police forces, and we do that for the benefit of the public, and by shining a light on positive practice as well as poor practice across the service, the inspections that we carry out are designed to help police and crime commissioners hold their forces to account. Where we do have concerns, we typically make recommendations to the force, and it's then up to the force concerned, to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and also on occasions to the government, to decide how best to act on that information. By way of example, last year I led an inspection that looked at how missing children are dealt with by police forces. And we published a report this year which was called Missing Children Who Cares? And what we found was that the police response to children who go missing was inconsistent. And as a result, those children who did go missing were at risk of suffering economic, financial, or indeed sexual exploitation. As a result of that work, and indeed as a result of other work that was done, the Home Secretary announced, in fact it was the Home Office that announced, that they would devise a strategy, and that strategy is being finalised at the moment. It's a missing persons strategy, but the treatment of children forms part of it. And all agencies, not just the police service, will be required to adhere to the terms of that strategy. And I think that this example clearly sets out our organisational purpose, which is on the final bullet point, which is to promote improvements in policing to make everyone safer. As an inspectorate, we have no regulatory authority. Our power comes from our voice. And by using evidence-based inspections in the form of easy-to-read reports, because the idea is that any member of the public should be able to identify from our reports and from our website how their force is doing. And we have received feedback that our reports are very easy to read and very accessible. But we report on what we find without fear or favour. So to our findings. Over the past 6 years, we've regularly reported on the police response to austerity. For example, in 2014, we reported that over the previous 4 years, forces had found nearly £2.5 billion worth of savings, and we were impressed by that. We were, however, concerned that the cuts made were having an adverse effect on neighbourhood policing, which we regard as the lifeblood of effective policing. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that by maintaining contact with local neighbourhoods, that is by being out on foot patrol rather than being in a car or back at the police station, that's how the police engage effectively with their local communities and not only maintain but also improve public confidence. It's also the important means by which they can then gather local intelligence, which helps them to prevent future offending, and that in turn can reduce future demand. That's where police community support officers come in, and they are non-warranted or unsworn officers who can really add value because they support the work of police officers. And we have found some very serious offences that police forces have been able to investigate effectively and have led to positive outcomes in terms of prosecutions as a result of that emphasis on neighbourhood policing and the role of police community support officers, or PCSOs. But back to 2014 and our report. We assessed that by 2015, police numbers were expected to be reduced by up to 37,000. And that's made up of nearly 17,000 police officers, over 15,500 civilians, and 4,500 police community support officers, or PCSOs, and yet we found that the front line wasn't being protected to the extent that we would have expected. And finally, we found that the approach of police forces to collaboration with each other, but also with the private and the public sector, was fragmented, overly complex, and just too slow. We went on to say that continuing to administer the sorts of substantial cost reductions that had taken place over the previous 5 years, over the next fiscal period of 5 years, would probably lead to some forces' futures being placed in jeopardy. Now, that wasn't to say that we didn't feel that there was room for further reductions in funding, but we said that there certainly would come a tipping point. Now I'd like to talk about our Peel inspections. In 2015, HMIC published its first police efficiency report as part of our new Peel inspection programme. Sir Robert Peel, as you probably all know, was an important historical figure in the UK, and he was essentially responsible for founding the police service. But as far as HMIC is concerned, Peel stands for Police Efficiency, Effectiveness and Legitimacy. Our Peel inspection programme is an annual programme of all, and we inspect all forces across England and Wales. And forces are either judged as outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. And we base that on our inspection findings, our analysis, and also the personal judgment of myself and my colleagues. Our police efficiency inspection looked at how well forces had managed their budgets to meet current demand, how affordable their workforce models were, and how sustainable their plans were in the medium to long term. The results are on the slide, but in summary, what we found was that the best forces had moved beyond short-term spending reductions to look at longer-term improvement and change programs in order to reduce costs and improve the quality of their service. We also found that the police service needed to improve its understanding of demand for its services, and particularly projections for future demand. And the other headline was that with regard to workforce planning, whereas the emphasis to date had been on capacity, that is, what is affordable, the emphasis now needed to shift to one of capability, namely the capability of its workforce, and that would be informed by a clearer understanding of demand, which would enable forces to target the sorts of skills that they needed to have in order to meet that demand. We also called for a greater investment in IT infrastructure, and so I listened with interest to the Minister's points on that topic. In November of 2015, which was the month after we published our efficiency report, and shortly after the tragic terrorist attacks in Paris, as part of the spending review, the government announced that police funding would be protected until 2020. However, the Home Secretary explained that this didn't mean that forces could take their foot off the gas. They should still continue to look for further savings and also further efficiencies. Against that backdrop, the crime survey in England and Wales had shown that over the same period, 2010 to 2015-16, measured crime had fallen by as much as 28%. However, as I shall come to, and as I'm sure you all know, the fact that there's been a significant fall in measured crime does not necessarily mean that there's been a fall in the call for police services. I've mentioned that there are three pillars that we inspect: efficiency, effectiveness, and legitimacy. And I've concentrated on efficiency because of the subject of the conference. However, I would like to briefly touch on other aspects of our appeal programme and our wider inspection programme. As part of our effectiveness inspections, we also assess how effective all 43 of the forces are in 4 respects: at preventing crime and antisocial behaviour, at investigating crime and managing offenders, at protecting vulnerable victims and their interests, and at dealing with serious and organised crime. And whilst we found that 1 force was outstanding and 24 forces were rated as good, we did find that a high number of forces were failing to protect the vulnerable from harm. Our legitimacy inspections assess the extent to which forces demonstrate an ethical culture, how well they understand, engage with, and treat their local communities, and we specifically consider whether the use of stop and search powers, or indeed the use of taser, is fair and appropriate. And this is important because stop and search and also the use of taser, these are examples where the police come into direct contact with the local communities that they serve. Now, overall, forces fared very well in the legitimacy inspections, but we did find that 14 forces weren't adequately complying with the stop and search scheme which has been implemented. However, as I've said, and as you've heard from Gary, and HMIC doesn't just conduct peel inspections, we also conduct thematic inspections on specific themes, which enable us to look in more detail at specific issues. And by gathering that rich data source, we're able to make general recommendations for the service as a whole, which hopefully do improve standards across the board and help all forces in terms of their performance. Some of the areas where we've carried out thematic inspections and where we're planning to include hate crime, domestic abuse, trafficking and modern slavery, and also counter-terrorism and stalking and harassment. And if I can give a quick plug for my organisation, the results of these inspections, as well as our overall peel inspections, are available on our website, and they're available in summary form in our annual State of Policing report. But I think that these inspections, be they thematic or peel inspections, they have highlighted an emerging theme. And it's a phenomenon which the service faces and which I like to explore in just a little more detail in the final section of my talk. The true challenge facing policing in England and Wales as I see it today. I mentioned earlier that although measured crime was falling, this didn't necessarily reflect a fall in the requirement for policing services. And you'll be aware that many calls to police forces are not policing related, and often the police service finds itself as the emergency service of last resort, the default emergency service, if you will. And of course, the police don't have any discretion. They can't decide that they're not going to answer that call or they're not going to attend that particular incident. And in addition, the profile of offending appears to be changing. We've got quite a significant example in the UK, which involves a well-known celebrity whose name is Jimmy Savile. He was found after his death to have abused a number of young women and young girls, stretching back over decades, in fact. And as a result of that occurring and those allegations, a number of high-profile individuals, be they politicians, celebrities, clergymen, found that allegations of abuse were made against them. And there were a number of prosecutions, many of which were successful and some of which were not. In order to ascertain whether there was a systemic, institutionalised issue as regards child abuse, the Home Secretary announced that there would be a public inquiry into child abuse, and it would be headed up by a judge, Judge Lowell Goddard. Now, I've found out that since I came to Canada, Judge Goddard has resigned, but the inquiry is still continuing and a new chair has been appointed, and in fact the inquiry continues apace. And since these high-profile cases have occurred, increasing numbers of complainants have had the confidence to come forward and make allegations of sexual abuse, in some instances stretching back over decades. And as a result, police forces across the country are reporting that they've seen significant increases in their workloads, and some of them are struggling in order to deal with that rise in demand. Indeed, the National Policing Lead on Child Protection was quoted recently as saying that as a result of the inquiry, he expects an extra 30,000 cases to be referred to different forces around the country, and that he also expects there to be a rise, an increase to as many as 200,000 cases that forces will be dealing with by 2020. So different types of crimes are being reported, and we are seeing spikes in different types of crimes. But also a recent report by the Office for National Statistics concluded that whilst the most recent crime surveys do show that recorded crime is down significantly, there has been a marked rise in online fraud, which has all but eclipsed any reductions in other types of offending. These developments do lead us at HMIC to the view that the true challenge for policing is not just the need to do more with less, important though that is. The true challenge, as we see it, facing the police service today is the changing nature of crime and offending. And really the challenge that forces face is their ability to keep pace with that changing nature. The move away from hard performance targets and towards a more nuanced and rounded expectation to reduce crime has provided an opportunity for forces to look more broadly at the profile of offending in their forces and also at how they deliver their services. But in so doing, forces are finding that the skills required, whether to deal with vulnerable victims who may be victims of child abuse or domestic abuse, or indeed may have mental health issues, which form a significant part of their current demand, or indeed the skills required to secure evidence so as to be able to prosecute effectively cases of online fraud and other cybercrime, or to deal with online grooming, or indeed the skills required to tackle extremism and radicalisation are very distinct from the skills, some of which were required, say, 20 years ago, when the profile and nature of offending was very different. The service will have to attract, therefore, a new and diverse workforce which has differing skills and approaches to meet that challenge, but it's also going to have to harness and develop the skills of its existing workforce, many of whom have served their forces loyally for many years. That said, our thematic inspections and also our Peel reports do demonstrate that the general direction of travel is a positive one, whether in terms of making budget adjustments and cuts or in terms of improving specific priorities such as domestic abuse. And overall public satisfaction is high. Yes, there are variations across the country, but overall public satisfaction is high and improving. And this therefore reinforces the importance of ensuring that neighbourhood policing continues to be a central plank of policing activity. The police service is also working with its professional arm, the College of Policing, as well as with other private and public sector organisations to deliver the sorts of transformational changes that will be required if the service is to meet that challenge effectively. And this has included civilianisation, but it must be said that where this occurs, clear governance and accountability arrangements are essential in order for those arrangements to work effectively. So, to conclude, we've learned a great deal at HMIC about policing in England and Wales and in the UK, and we've learned about practices that work and some that perhaps don't work as well. Over the coming years, challenging times lie ahead for the police, which is no surprise. And I think that those challenges include the continued need to improve the way that vulnerable victims and perpetrators are dealt with, the ongoing need to make efficiency savings, the ongoing threat of terrorism and extremism, and indeed, the challenge of increasing the diversity of the police so that in each locality, each force and its members is reflective of the community that it serves, which will give added legitimacy to the police service. On these issues and many others, HMIC will continue to shine a light on those areas where things are going well and where they're not. And hopefully we'll continue to improve and demonstrate our purpose, which is to improve policing to make everyone safer. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you for sharing the UK experience with us. There are 3 messages I'm taking away. First, the fiscal circumstances which drove reforms in the UK are exactly the same circumstances we face here in Ontario. The one big difference, however, is that here in Ontario, that fiscal challenge has mostly been left to 444 municipal governments to manage, although we don't set the rules. In the UK, the same government owns both. Second, the work of HMIC is a great example of one element of an accountable, transparent, and accessible civilian oversight system for policing. We do some of that here, but not nearly so well or so thoroughly. Lastly, in the UK, as Wendy noted, many policing functions are delivered by those who are not sworn armed officers. This includes civilians in uniform with limited police powers, and also includes the use of private security in some circumstances. Clearly, it is being done. Thank you again for helping us imagine how policing could be delivered differently. Change is achievable here too. On behalf of the delegates, please accept this token of our appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very kind.
Appreciate it. I think we can all agree that the future of marijuana legislation in Canada